Greetings and durud. Welcome to the second episode of the inaugural season of Farhang Literature, Farhang Foundation's newly launched book club. I am Ali Reza Ardakani, Executive Director of Farhang Foundation, and we're delighted to have you with us for what promises to be an incredible discussion about today's remarkable best-selling novel. Today, we are honored to welcome acclaimed author, Ms. Marjan Kamali, to discuss her magnificent new book, The LION WOMEN of Tehran. People magazine calls the book an evocative read and a powerful portrait of friendship, feminism, and political activism. And Oprah Daily calls it elegant, a tender, beautifully written examination of two women. Marjan Kamali is the award-winning author of The Stationery Shop, a national and international bestseller, and Together Tea, a Massachusetts Book Award finalist. She's a 2022 recipient of the National Endowment of the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship. Marjan's novels are published and translated in more than 25 languages. Her essays have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Literary Hub, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. Marjan holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of California, Berkeley, a Master of Business Administration from Columbia University, and a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from New York University. Born in Turkey to Iranian parents, she spent her childhood in Turkey, Iran, Germany, Kenya, and the US. Marjan is currently the Fannie Hurst Writer in Residence at Brandeis University. She lives in Boston area with her family. Joining Ms. Kamali in conversation today is none other than award-winning author, screenwriter, and producer Abdi Nazemian. Abdi is the author of 5 novels, including Like a Love Story, a Stonewall Honor Book, and The Chandler Legacies. His latest novel, Only This Beautiful Moment, won the 2024 Stonewall Award from the American Library Association. He has also received the Lambda Literary Award for his literary work. Abdi's screening credits include films such as The Artist's Wife and The Quiet. He has served as a producer on numerous films, including Call Me by Your Name and Little Woods. The format of today's program will begin with a one-on-one conversation between Abdi and Marjan, and later Abdi will host a book club talk with you, the audience members who wish to participate. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming these two incredible authors to Farhang Literature. Welcome, Marjan.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
And welcome, Abdi Jan.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you both here. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this Saturday, and I will step back and let you take it over, Abdi Jan.
Thank you so much. Some of you were here last time for our first book club with Kaveh Akbar, so you know that you can send questions via the chat, and I will do my best to incorporate them into my discussion. And then after, we'll be talking together about what the book inspired us to think about. Marjan June, I've already expressed to you how much I love this book. I've read it multiple times now. It has a place in my heart, truly. And before I even ask you a question, I wanted to share with you and with everyone the way I first experienced the book, which was as an audiobook on a drive with me and my dad in the front seats of the car and my 2 children in the back seat. And we were on a road trip, and as we were listening to the book, my dad kept interrupting to tell stories from his time in Iran when the book talked so vividly about those sandwiches, the kolbas and salad olivier sandwiches at Cafe. Oh my God, what was now I'm like Cafe Andre. My dad was telling his remembrances of those sandwiches. And then when you introduce the character of Merdad, who attends Alborz High School, my dad talked about how he briefly went to that school and the circumstances with which he left. These were all stories I had never heard before, and certainly my kids had never heard before. And so in that car, 3 generations in one Iranian family were brought closer together because of your book. And I'm sure we're not the only family who's had that experience. So I share that to lead to the first question, which is, How does it feel for you to write this novel for the Iranian community specifically? And how does it differ as an Iranian American author writing for Western readers and Iranian readers?
Hmm. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you again for inviting me to this wonderful book club. It's such a joy to be here with the Farhang Foundation and with you, Abdi June. It means a lot to me. I can't tell you how much what you said is just music to my ears. To know that reading the book, listening to it, and Mojan Navabi and Nikki Masood did a great job with the audio, I know. And I just love that it sparked memories for your dad. It created conversation for 3 generations, and it helped connect you. I mean, that's basically, I'm done. My dream. Thank you. Um, the truth is, writing it did that for me too. So, in order to know which sandwiches were served at Cafe Andre, in order to know about Alborz High School, I took it upon myself to talk at great length with my parents. And some of it was seriously just for research. You know, I needed a detail. I needed to bring 1960s Iran, 1950s, 1970s Iran to life, and I needed their expertise. But a lot of it was just an excuse to talk to them and to learn more from them and to open up this vault of memories that a lot of Iranians of their generation hold and don't get to always discuss, and in a way to memorialize the country they knew, the country in which they lived. Now, to your question of, writing for Iranians versus writing for Americans, and I know you've probably experienced this in your own work. It's a huge responsibility to think that we are out here representing Iranians to an audience whose vision of Iranians is limited and quite black and white. And when I was first starting out with Together Tea, I think I felt this need to explain and to expose and to show and possibly to educate. But I think as I've grown and as I've matured, and even with Together Tea, let me tell you the feedback after the first draft, I've realized it's not our job to educate a single soul. It's not our job to explain anything. Um, all we do is we center these characters. So I center Ellie and I center Homa. I center the mom. I center the other characters in the book. I center Iranian people. And the world over reads the book. And guess what? They see themselves in these characters. And I think that's really the trick, is to center the people without thinking about that enormous responsibility. And then it all comes out in the wash. Like, I get letters from Iranian readers who say, this is my story. You wrote my story. This was my experience. You brought to life my own friendship. And then I get readers from, Kansas and India who say, this was my friendship. You brought to life how I felt about my childhood friendship. That, I think, is the magic, and that's a big privilege, and that's something that, it comes out without you even intending it to.
That is very true. At the same time, I think you clearly have taken this role, the responsibility of telling our stories so seriously. And I want to thank you for that, because I've read 2 of your books now. I still have to read Together Tea, but they're so humanistic in their portrayal of people. And I find that's something that's not always the case when people from our part of the world are being depicted. And so I'm also curious, and you hinted at this a little, but what was for you coming into Western publishing as an Iranian author with an eye toward telling stories about people that centers people, was there resistance towards that?
Oh, my friend, yes, so much, so much. So, as we're sitting here today, it's a very different scene. It's a very different scope. And we still are fighting and facing resistance when we tell humanistic stories about a people for whom the expectations are a certain way that just don't reflect the truth. So I can give you a very specific example. When I was writing my first book, I was this aspiring author. I was determined to tell our stories. I deeply wanted to, in my young idealistic mind, add to the narrative in a way such that some of the stereotypes about Iranians that existed in the West and in the US in particular could be questioned, could at least be somewhat broken. So I worked feverishly on my first novel. I worked so hard to create this family, and I wanted to show the joy. I wanted to show the love. I wanted to show the nuances, the complications, the music, the food, all the things that sometimes, get erased when our tales are told by the West. And I finished the manuscript. I finished the draft. I was deeply, deeply hopeful to get it published. And I met with publishing people. I got that opportunity. So I met in New York with some publishing professionals who told me they loved the writing. They told me they liked the story for the most part. But they said, this father in your book, the father figure, is too nice to be an Iranian man. He's too kind. And they said, when people read a novel about an Iranian Muslim man, that's not what they want to read. So as they're talking, my heart is just sinking, like I can feel my body start to tremble because I couldn't believe what they were saying to me, looking me in the eye and saying this. And then they continued and they said, maybe you could change the father and just have him be, more of an Iranian, like maybe he could beat up the wife or something. And I just sat there and I said, no, I won't do that. And they said, okay, well, are you sure? Because we're telling you how you can change it to make it sell. And I said, no, I won't do that. And they said, well, then you won't publish this book. This isn't going to get published. This isn't what people want when they pick up a book about Iran. And I left that office so dejected. I went home and I cried and cried and cried. And I realized this is what they want. And no, nothing we do can change that. But I didn't change it. I didn't change the father, and I didn't change the story. And you know what, though? They were right, because that book did not get published for another, I would say, 12 years after we had that conversation. So we had that conversation, it was right after September 11th, which may have had something to do with it. And we had that conversation then in that New York office, and when Together Tea was published, it was 2013. So,
Wow.
and now people tell me they love the dad and he's their favorite character and he's so relatable, and, American people too. So
Yeah.
these are the things that we have had to face.
Well, thank you for not changing that and for standing strong in what you knew was right. I think you said that maybe they were right. They were right in the short term, not in the long term. And as a Iranian writer who has faced some of these same issues, more on the Hollywood side in film and TV than in publishing, I just remind our audience this is why it's so important for our community to show up for our storytellers and artists, because we have to show the way to other audiences that we want humanistic stories about people from our part of the world. It's so important. Before we get deeper into a discussion of the novel, you have such an interesting backstory. I just was wondering if you could tell the audience a little bit about your childhood, the places you lived, and your relationship to Iran.
I will. I would tell you all of that. And I just want to add, you're so right that we have to stand our ground. And they were right only in that I didn't get it published, they said you
Yeah,
won't get it published, and I didn't, but they were wrong about everything else.
exactly.
Yes. Okay, so my backstory is sometimes people assume that because I've written 3 novels so far, and they all take place in Iran and the US. and I center Iranian people and Iranian characters. And people assume that I grew up there. And people assume that I have this like vast knowledge about the country from my lived experience. Well, I hardly ever lived in Iran, actually. I only lived in Iran between the ages of 2 and 5, and then again between 9 and 10 and a half. And the rest of my childhood, I lived all over the world, and honestly, my adulthood too. Um, but that second segment, when I did live in Iran, between 9 and 10 and a half, was during a really pivotal time in its history. It was right after the revolution of 79, and it was during basically the first year and a half of the Iran-Iraq War. So I experienced that war, albeit just for the first year and a half, but I remember going to the basement at nights as the Argir went off, right? The sirens went off. I remember every time coming back up, feeling grateful that we were still here. There's so much that happened in that year and a half. When I entered Iran, the laws were one way for the dress code for women and what have you. They changed while we were there. So even though it was a very short period, I feel like it was such a visceral experience that ingested. I ingested the texture of that city at the time, and I have so many memories of that year and a half, more so than I couldn't tell you what I did 2 weeks ago in Boston, but I can tell you about my 10th birthday party as the bombs fell, you know? So my experience with Iran is super short, but my curiosity is endless, particularly because my experience living in Iran is so short. And because I grew up with two parents who were born and raised in Iran and who would talk about this country. And then we would watch the nightly news, and that country was depicted in a way that was the polar opposite of what my parents were saying. So, you know, my dad would talk to me about going to films at Cinema Metropole and having espressos in these cafes and the vibrancy of the culture that was expanding and sort of blossoming in the cities in the 50s and the 60s. And then we turn on the news. And it was just, again, just black and white. Men were fanatics, women were oppressed. It was just this very simplistic depiction. So I think there was a part of me that wanted to reconcile those two very different portrayals. Were my parents exaggerating? Was the news exaggerating? Where did the truth lie? And I really also just want to learn. I'm learning as I write, and I'm learning about the history, and I'm learning about the culture. And part of me, isn't this what we all do when we write? We're kind of memorializing a time and place that is gone. So when I write about Iran in the 20th century, which is something I love to do, I'm memorializing a version of that country that no longer exists, but I'm hoping to capture it, and I'm hoping to just have us hold it in our hearts so that we can have it because it's vanished to some degree.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said. Thank you. Okay, let's get into a discussion of the book. And I saw one question in the Q&A, and I just want to answer it, that the book that was published in 2013 was not The LION Women of Tehran.
Oh, no, it was Together Tea.
It was
first
Together
novel.
Tea.
No, there's a whole different book. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so this is a book that I have read now, 3 times. One because twice on paper, once in audiobook, and on paper I've underlined so much. I'm somebody who makes notes in the book. And of all of the passages I underlined, I think my favorite line is when you say, the friendship between Iran and America seemed like it would last forever, but I should have known that some friendships fracture and rupture beyond belief. It's such a perfect line because this is a book about friendship between two incredible women, and it's so specific in its depiction of that friendship. But then in that line, you indicate that it's more broadly about other dualities between East and West, rich and poor, past and present. And I'm curious if these kinds of thematic resonances are always in your head as you write, and how you balanced in this very specific story the balance between the specific and the universal.
Thank you. I feel those dualities are sort of in our subconscious all the time. So as I sit down and write, I'm not necessarily thinking about the big thematic truths, but it's like they're in the water, right? They're in your soul. I love that you caught the echo of the friendship rupture between Ellie and Homa, our two heroines, and between the US and Iran, because I also just wanted to have readers think a little bit about how quickly friendships can rupture in life and in fiction, between people, between countries. Once upon a time, Iran and the US were supposedly best friends. You could argue how real and deep that connection was, but at the same time, there was a sense of betrayal. That friendship was ruptured. And then it's as though things can turn on a dime. One day you're everybody's beloved, and then the next day you're the Lulu Khorkhore of the region, and you're just like this big bad monster that the entire planet is supposed to loathe and fear. And there's a lot of propaganda that goes into that. And people like you and me are just like writing our stories saying, is that really the whole picture? Um, but when I'm doing the actual writing of the book, I don't think too much about the big picture because I think it'll maybe stall me and paralyze me. But there are dualities, not just, US, America, but like you said, rich and poor. Most friendship stories, it's sort of an archetype. It's not that uncommon. You have the rich friend, the poor friend. Like if you think about the kite runner. And then another sort of motif of friendship stories in fiction is the brave one, the meek one, if you think about My Brilliant Friend. And so I was thinking about rich, poor, especially in Iran at a time when the socioeconomic differences were so stark and led to so much resentment and anger. And then um, the brave young woman versus the one who just wants to keep her head down and live her life and not make a big splash. So those are all dualities that are really fun to play with and really fun to explore as you're developing the story.
Absolutely. I felt that all. The specificity was there. You could tell you were always focused on the characters, but then it brought up all those dualities. For me, one of the most moving was between past and present, to be honest. There was another line I underlined where Ellie says, Homo was my past, my two worlds were not supposed to collide. And that was so beautiful to me because it just spoke to the way that we're all living in our present, but our past is always there waiting to come back. We're always in dialogue with a version of our past. I think especially as Iranians who all have a history, not all, in the diaspora, we all have a history far away. That's something that was so moving for me. Okay, so your book also it depicts such a varied group of Iranian women. Of course, Eli and Omar at the center, but there's so many other characters of different generations, faiths, classes, and beliefs, and their relationships are often tested by politics. At one point, Ellie says, "How could I have been so naive as to believe that our friendship would just sail along despite our differences in wealth and politics?" And I'm curious what advice you would give to Iranian men and women, some of whom are here listening, on how we can be a more united and empathetic support system for each other in these divided times, and perhaps what hopes you have for your art and our art to ignite in this cultural community.
Yeah, we have always been divided by politics. Unfortunately, in Iran and outside of Iran, it's been the lightning rod and it's ruined friendships, ruined families, right? Ruined connections between people that would have otherwise been there. Um, I'm noticing it now more and more also here in the US, and it's heartbreaking. It's heart-wrenching to think that this just keeps happening. But of course, you can understand some of the reasons because when someone holds a belief that is so opposite what you think adheres to your own sense of safety and well-being and right to exist in some ways, it's difficult to say, let's go have a coffee. But I do think we should keep the lines of communication open. You know, in the diaspora, there are so many different factions and beliefs and motivations. I do think if you scratch beneath the surface, we have more in common than we would like to agree to. We really do. And in the book, I forced myself to write about classes and religious group, people belonging to a religious sort of ideology that I myself don't believe in, because by writing it myself, it forces me to stretch and it forces me to have empathy for that person. So, for example, you know, in the LION Women of Tehran, Homa, to begin with, when she's a young woman, is a communist. She later becomes a women's rights activist. Ellie is a monarchist, and so is her mother later. And so there's this divide, but they have this friendship that manages to survive, even though it's ruptured for some time, manages to survive these things. And then we have a character like Abdul, who's religious, and you know, he's what by American standards he'd be called an Islamic fundamentalist. But we see maybe some actions he takes that might surprise us for the better. So I'm always trying to sort of bridge the divides. I don't know, maybe I'm just a hopeless optimist. Ooh, is that a thing? Can you be a hopeless optimist?
Well, I think you just coined it. You just
Mm,
hopeless optimist. I love that, and it shows in your books. And I think the thing you use the word empathy, and I think empathy is what is in this novel. It's just brimming through all the characters. And I myself, as somebody who has an Iranian community just within my family alone, and in the bigger community, people who have so many different beliefs and political differences, but we always come together. I just love that about your books, and I hope that as a community we can keep showing up for each other and giving each other grace and empathy, as your characters do. We have so many questions, and so I just want to get to some of them. I will try and get to all of them. Just very broadly, this is from an anonymous attendee who asks where you get the inspiration for your characters, whether they're fictional, completely fictional, or based on real people. And Sima Behani also asked if My Brilliant Friend, the Elena Ferrante book, uh, which is already a modern classic, I think, gave you any inspiration. So let's dig into the inspirations.
yeah, the characters are for the most part made up, but I think always they are based in part on a composite, at least, of people in your own life and things that you've experienced or, you know, interacted with. My Brilliant Friend, absolutely, absolutely. I remember finishing that book and thinking, I want to write the Persian version of this, you know? And so when a review came out that compared the LION Women of Tehran to My Brilliant Friend, that was the biggest compliment. I think that's the biggest compliment you can give me personally, to compare it to My Brilliant Friend. And I've had books that have come out, you know, in the past 6 years that an author has said this is an homage to the stationery shop in a way. Like, I'm deeply honored by that. Yes, you know, I feel these characters, I make them up, I borrow from people I know. So for example, in the LION Women of Tehran, you know, one thing that happens with the friendship is it's ruptured. One of the young women ends up going to prison for being a communist in the early 1960s. Well, that's what happened to my own aunt, you know. So like these are family stories that are within you. Um, and then when you're writing things like the beginning of a friendship or the way two friends interact when they are playing together for the first time, or a fight they have, obviously I'm not Ellie, I'm not Homa, they're not based on necessarily people I know, but you borrow from your own emotional memories. I know what it's like to make a friend. I know what it's like to fight with a friend. I know what those feelings feel like. So I do sometimes sort of go into my own emotional well, and I dig up those memories because, like you said, the past is always with us. It's
Yes.
always there, whether we want to admit it or not.
Oh, of
And,
course.
right?
Of
Like
course.
it's
And I often discover when I'm writing, and I write young adult novels, so I'm often traveling back to my own teen years, but that memories come that I didn't realize were there. In the writing, it's almost like it summons things that had long been buried inside you. It's such a moving process.
things get triggered. They sure do, don't they? I mean, in a way, it's very therapeutic and healing, I think, to write. And I hope it's therapeutic and healing for people to read the stories, which I'm told there's a lot of good crying. So we like that. Like the
Absolutely.
good kind of cry.
Absolutely. So, okay, this is a question from Sohaila Crane, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing anyone's name. I will do my best. Uh, Sohaila asks, tell us about your thought process on using the Persian version of many words, slang, poems seamlessly embedded in the English language narratives in the book. Were you concerned about potentially losing a reader's interest in the book? And I will add a question I have that I know many people have already submitted to Farhang, which is to learn a little bit more about the term Shirzan, where that came from for you, and also how you chose lion women versus lioness.
Okay, yeah. So including the Persian words is definitely a choice, right, that a writer makes. I could have chosen to do none. I could have chosen to do more. In my own personal process, when I'm writing the story, when the characters are in Iran or, speaking, they would have been speaking Persian, in my head, I'm listening to the dialogue in Persian. So sometimes as I'm transcribing it into English in order to write the book, there's certain phrases that I can't resist including because I try not to overdo it because I know it can be annoying for people who don't speak Persian, but at the same time, some things are just too perfect. I can't not put it in because we just have these great turns of phrase. We have very specific things that can't be translated. So sometimes I do include it more for the flavor or for the vibe. And then I always do then give you the English, like I contextualize it in English so that if you speak zero Persian, you're not lost. Like you get what that meant because I kind of say it. Um, so it's just a personal choice. It's so hard for me to resist that temptation. The Lion Women of Tehran, the title. Okay, so Lion Women was a phrase I grew up hearing. So as a child, I heard about Shirzan, Lion Women. She's a Shirzan. They're Shirzan. And it was so empowering. It was so incredibly wonderful to think that we had a name and a label for women who were fierce and unstoppable and opinionated and strong. That was really great to know living in a patriarchy, and I felt like that's wonderful that we actually have a label for that. And in truth, I was surrounded by lion women in my life. My mother, my great grandmother for sure, and my great aunts. I was surrounded by lion women. So the title, though, I'll be honest, was not my title. I had another title entirely, which in retrospect was actually a terrible title. And it was my publisher, my editor, who wanted the Lion Women of Tehran. I know some people think, why not lioness? Well, I translated it literally from Shirzan, and in Persian, we don't have the gendered lion, it's Shir. So I literally translated Shirzan to lion women. Also, lioness was discussed, but there's another big book that came out this year, and it's called The Lioness of Boston. And, for reasons that you and I may not understand, publishers don't want to have titles that are too similar sounding to another book coming out around the same time, right? Because they don't want to create confusion. And so Lioness was out. And now, even though I fought this title in the beginning, I can't imagine it being called anything else. I truly cannot. Now I'm very protective of it.
It's a beautiful, beautiful title. I Shirzan is not an expression I grew up hearing, and so for me, it's a really useful, beautiful phrase and one I learned from your book. So thank you. This is a question up from Roseanne Gerami, who says that in one of the latter chapters, when Bahar goes to the prom, the book shifts to third person. And if you
Mhm.
could talk about that shift, I myself had a question about whether you always planned, because the majority of the book is told from Ellie's perspective, if it was also always the plan to switch to Homa's perspective and then to third person, or if that's a discovery you made.
It was a discovery I made. It was not my plan. So when I started writing this book, I was writing it entirely, initially, from Ellie's point of view. Ellie Elohe is our main character, so to speak. She's the friend who we spend the most time with in her point of view. And I was kind of challenging myself to write a book in first person because both Together Tea and The Stationery Shop, my two previous novels, were mostly told in close third points of view. And so I was trying to write a book from the first person point of view in the I voice, and it was mostly Ellie's voice. And then somewhere along the first draft, I knew something was missing, and it's sort of like the most obvious answer is the one we want to avoid. I went on a long walk one day and it was sort of like, of course I have to include Homa's point of view. But I was resisting it because I was worried that Ellie and Homa might sound too similar. They're the same age, they're born in the same year, living in the same place. But then as I wrote it, Homa's voice took over and I hope she sounds distinctly herself, right? And there's certain techniques you can use, like Homa's voice is written entirely in the present tense. Ellie's is written in the past tense. And to the question that you posed from our group about Bahar, that chapter, there's a chapter toward the end of the book when we hear the point of view of Bahar, who I don't know if this is a spoiler, but we'll say it. She's Homa's daughter.
It's a book club, so we're assuming
Okay,
most have read the book. It's
most
not
people
spoiler.
have read. Okay, okay. So Bahar, right? We Homa's daughter, we hear from her. Um, just that one chapter. And I felt like I needed to be in her voice for that after prom party because she's going through such a culture shock, having just come from Iran and being sort of thrown into this party, which is the quintessential high school American kids drinking beer. She's like, what? And she comes all dressed up because she doesn't know that like that's not cool. And I really wanted to be in her voice so I could get her interiority there. And yeah, that was a fun chapter and also a difficult chapter to write.
It was it was a wonderful chapter. I would like to ask because I'm sure like there's so many comments I'm trying to go through, but I'm sure there's some about Ellie's mother, who to me is just such a surprising scene-stealing character. Ellie herself describes her as exhausting, confounding, at times suffocating, but she also acknowledges that her love was the one constant in my entire life. So I'd love to ask how you came up with this character who's so incredibly complex, and also ask about her superstitions, which to me, oh my God, I felt, to use the most Western phrase I can think of, triggered by it. I myself am very superstitious, was raised very superstitious. Western therapy has taught me to call it magical thinking OCD. So, in addition to telling us a bit about the character, I'm curious what you think about why Iranians, because I've talked to so many friends about this, but why we cling so hard to superstitions.
Yeah, oh, I hear you. I hear you. Well, first of all, I'm so happy to hear that you loved Ellie's mom because she's a piece of work. She's quite an intense character. I believe I should share with our entire group today. She is not my mother. Let's get that out of the way. Because, whenever you write a mother, people think it's your mother, or But no, Ellie's mom isn't my mom. But what I wanted to do is I really wanted to explore a narcissistic parent because I'm really interested for a variety of reasons in the narcissistic personality. Um, I believe I've done some research on it, and I believe the narcissistic personality comes about as a self-defense mechanism. And we're amongst friends, so I hope people aren't upset when I say, in our community, there is this personality that pops up, right? We do have, if you were to just look at a certain generation of Iranians, there is a lot of narcissism. And I wanted to know, where does that come from? What is the root cause? And what is it trying to combat or deal with or explain? We won't get into it all, but I do think some of it has to do with unresolved trauma. I do think a lot of it has to do with constantly being underestimated and misunderstood in a way that you almost have to compensate by being in this way. So Ellie's mom was very interesting to write. And another reason I wanted her to be a narcissist was because it would force Ellie to grow in ways that she wouldn't otherwise grow. And because her mother is the way she is, Ellie is insecure. She can never be quite comfortable in her shoes. She's always worried. Her mother's always sort of putting her in her place, taking the wind out of her sails occasionally. And I needed that for Ellie, for her to come to in the arc of the story, a situation where she can radically accept who her mother is and forgive and enjoy the great parts about her. Like you said, her love was the one constant in her life. And it is tied into the superstition. So, in the LION Women of Tehran, I write a lot about the evil eye, Cheshming. And I have deep envy, no pun intended. I have deep envy for everyone who grew up without this concept because I feel like you're just freer than the rest of us because we're always like looking over our shoulder, like, oh my God, is someone gonna chesh me? Is this, and I've thought a lot about why we have this in our culture, and it's not just ours. I get notes from readers. It's in Indian culture, Jewish culture, and I know Jewish and Iranian intersect, but it's in Turkish, Greek, it's in so many cultures, Italian. I think perhaps the sort of cultural groundwork for it was to not have too much envy between the haves and have-nots. I think it could be an economic thing because if the haves were always showing off, constantly showing off, at times when the have-nots were so very radically different from them, it could foment revolutions, right? Like
Yes.
Iranians are much more protective of their wealth. They don't necessarily, with exceptions, shove it down your throat because there's this thing, I'll be cheshed and all that. And it goes so against our current day social media influencer situation, where on social media, everybody's constantly showing off. I had this fantastic vacation. Look at how wonderful I look, and look at my incredible children. And sometimes when I'm scrolling Instagram, the Iranian in me is like,
Oh,
just
yeah.
right? It's like,
Same.
why are you posting this?
Oh, same. I've learned so much from the difference between me and my Western friends who always like tell people good news before they've signed the contract or something with them. I'm like, no, 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 you don't tell anyone. But I also just to bring it back to how moved I was by the mother, and I realize we're already 45 minutes in, and I have so many more questions. But for me, the most moving scene with the mother and the superstition was when she herself worries that she will chishm her daughter Ellie. And she says, I noted this line down, even those who love you most can ruin your life, even the ones who you trust the most. And this feeling that this mother feels that she herself might be the one to curse her daughter is so heartbreaking. It just speaks to how destructive those kinds of superstitions can be within you. I was very, very moved by that.
Yeah,
Um,
you sometimes you worry, like people like Ellie's mom would worry that she's cheshming her own
yes.
daughter out of loving her too much.
Yes. Oh God.
I know it's complicated.
Beautiful. I am going to ask a question that I had, who that an audience member also had, Shima Shameli, who asked about the reference to Mahsa Amini at the end of the book. Now, if I am correct, you started writing the book in 2019. Mahsa Jina Amini died in September 2022, and your novel does end with an epilogue from 2022. So I'm curious not only about how that epilogue came about, but if the protests of that erupted after the Zan Zindagi Azadi movement changed the book in other ways.
Yes, let's talk about that. I did start in 2019, though it was a very different book. And then when I reconnected with a friend of mine on Instagram from Iran, who had been my best friend during the pandemic, that's when the LION Women really took shape. But yes, I wrote it throughout 2020, 21, 22. I was more than halfway done when Mahsa Jina Amini was arrested. And like so many people in the diaspora, I watched from afar with both hope and heartbreak. Um, the courage of the women and girls in Iran and later the men who joined them in solidarity was truly outstanding. And, I think as Iranians, we remember how fraught that time was. I mean, even in the diaspora, people were like glued to their screens, following every beat because it unlocked a lot of trauma for all of us. It was about so much more than hijab. It was about so much more. It was, in a way, like all these feelings that we had bottled up inside and tried to move on from just kind of came bubbling back up. And the injustice, the whole overall injustice, not just of that one horrific situation, but all of it, it just came to the forefront. So I did decide to include some of that in the epilogue that, you mentioned. I had the ending touch upon that movement, and I wanted the characters to be in complete awe of what was going on there and in complete fear and worry of it. And of course, at that time on Twitter, on all social media, there was this clip of an old woman. You could only see her from the back, and she was marching in the streets, and it was night. And she had like short white hair, and she had her fists in the air. And then I thought, that could be Homa. I don't know who it was. It was a beautiful woman in Iran. We only see her from the back. So I just thought that would have been a Homa, one of those people we have in our community who just doesn't ever give up fighting. So that's why I folded in to some degree the women life freedom movement, also just to be able to honor some of that.
Mhm. It was beautifully done. It was really gorgeous. Speaking of women, there was a question here. Here it is from Zorezan that's interesting. And you have so many compliments in the chat. I just want to tell you, everybody, I advise Marjan not to look at the chat so you can remain focused on your incredible answers. But so many people are moved by this book, love your work, and are complimenting it. But Zorezan asked if you've heard what have you heard from male readers? And she's saying as a woman, she relates to the characters. I'm curious if you've noticed a difference between the way men and women react to this novel.
Yeah, the reactions from male readers is different, whether they're Iranian or, in my case, mostly American that I've heard from. So American male readers are always commenting on the history. They're like, "Oh, I didn't know this. I didn't know that. And you talked about this." And I think for them, they enjoyed learning more about the history and what happened in the mid 20th century. We're feeling the ripple effects to this day, the mid to late 20th century, I should say. Iranian male readers, I mean, sometimes we just have to take a moment, because their reaction is so incredibly important to me. I mean, obviously, I hear from women a lot. I think the majority of readers of fiction are actually women, so that I hear from women so much, and that means so much to me. they see themselves in the story. But male readers see so much of their own trauma too, and their own healing too. And it's quite something to be at a book event and to have this like huge guy come up to you and say, I haven't cried like that in a long time. And I am honored when something like that happens. I'm deeply, deeply honored because I think, sadly, because of stereotypes, our male Iranians have even less permission to sit with some of these feelings and to heal.
That's very beautiful. And I know male readers are moved by it. I'm certainly not your average male, but as a man, I love it. And I know my dad, after we listened to that audiobook, we went out and bought a hard copy for him. And I know that when he was done, he gave it to a male friend of his. So I'm sure that this is a book that women are gifting each other and giving to each other, but I know that men are doing the same thing. We're all finding resonance in it. I'm going to do my best not to take over an hour of your time. So a couple of quick questions. One, I'm scrolling through these. One attendee asked if there's any chance the book might be translated into Persian.
Mm. So it's so hard. As you know, we can't do contracts with Iran due to the sanctions.
Right. Yes.
And it's quite heartbreaking, that whole situation. But the stationery shop was translated into Persian by two translators in Iran on their own. They just do it and they sell it. And so I know the stationery shop is literally in Iranian bookshops. I don't know if this will be translated into Persian by someone who takes it upon themselves, but due to some of the story, I don't know if it would be sold in bookshops there. I
Yeah.
think
No.
some of it might not be welcome. So, not to my knowledge.
Yeah, I've had the same question and the same issue. There have been a few questions about advice you might have for other Iranian writers or writers in general. So
Mhm.
up to that.
Okay, I will say read, read, read as much as you can, write as much as you can. Don't give up. Don't give up. I started out in this country, there was zero, literally zero. Then I went to a conference in 2011 when I was told I wouldn't get published. That was a different thing than what the earlier situation I told you, because the editor said, "Oh, we have Marjan Satrapi's Persepolis, we have Funny and Farsi, and we have Reading Lolita in Tehran, so we're good." And I said, okay, you have three, and then you're good. How many do you have by, I don't know, Italian Americans? So I would say, don't give up, don't give up, keep going, keep going. Tell your truth.
Beautiful. Um, we are getting very, very close to an hour. I want to end by talking about something really resonant and positive about the book, which is a depiction of our cuisine. The book is so full of descriptions of our food that just made me hungry. And food also plays such a big role in connecting the two best friends. I'm curious how you approach food and also what you think our food represents to us and how how important it is when presenting our culture to the greater world.
It is so important. First of all, I know I'm biased, but we have the best food on this planet Earth. We really do. And I feel like it's not as well known as some other cuisines. Again, some of it could be geopolitical, I don't know. But the food is what connects us to our culture. People like you and me, people who didn't necessarily grow up there. The food connects us to our culture. The food connects my kids to their culture, right? They're second generation. They love the food. They cook the food. Um, Also, our food, if you look at like what all nutritionists uh, say is the best way to eat, that's Persian cuisine. It's like we don't have other than chelo kebab, which I know is meat centric, but we have so many vegetables incorporated into the food. And I also feel that, for Ellie and Homa, cooking together is what makes them bond and it creates this foundation for their friendship. And the food in my own life here in the US, I invite my American, my Chinese, my Korean, my Indian, my Polish friends. And I'm like, I'm going to cook for you. And it's Persian food. They all love it. So I just think it's a great connector. It's a great connector. And I don't even want to think about life without our food. I just cannot. Like sometimes I look at people, I'm like, you've never had Persian food. Like, how is that a thing? How can you live? But I know I'm very biased and I'm
No,
showing.
and they all love it. I mean, throughout my life, so many of my Western friends, the minute they taste our home cooked food, it's over. They all they wanted to do was come over to our house when I was growing up.
They're lifers, right? They get that's
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's irresistible food.
Mhm.
Before I let you go, these are just a few comments that came in the last few minutes. Armita Moody says, please extend my total gratitude to Miss Marjan Kamali. I have bought this book for every person in my family. Darius Rafinejad says, we love you, Marjan. Keep writing your fabulous books. These are the kinds of comments that have been coming in. Um,
Oh,
I know I speak for everyone here and for so many fellow Iranians when I say your books mean so much to people and bring them closer. I started by telling you how it brought me closer to my dad and my kids. These are books that connect us to our community. That's such a gift you've given us. So thank you.
thank you, Abdi June. That means so much to me coming from you, coming from the people in the chat and the people present. Thank you for having me and thank you for letting me share my stories with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ali June. I'm gonna take my leave so that you guys can continue to discuss. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Marjan John and Abdi John. It's been captivating to just listen to your conversation. I could listen so much more. Your book has touched us all, and we feel so connected with you and the story. I will put you in the audience if you wish to continue and watch us. But we thank you
I'll
for.
leave so you can be really honest and not worry about. But thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. It was incredible.
Thank
Have a
you.
great rest of your Saturday.
You too.
Bye-bye. For all our audience members who would like to join us now for our on-screen conversation with Abdi John, please raise your hand. I see a lot of hands raised, so I'm going to slowly start inviting you to join us, and we can have a conversation now.
Oh, I see someone. Okay, Anjali.
Hi. We did the book for our book club. So we are a group of physicians. We are in Virginia. So our physician group club, a book club for last month, we did the book. It's an amazing book. And I downloaded it on Audible for my book club. But my husband, who's not a physician, he read it even before I could finish it. And he absolutely loved it. And both of us are Indian, so we could relate to so many of the components of the book that she was talking about. And all the physicians in our book club, we all loved the book. We had our book club meeting to discuss the book already, and the consensus was it was a very well-written book. So thank you, and I attended her, conversation right now. She's just amazing.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that thing. And it's always so nice. This is such a obviously majority Iranian group, but it's always so nice when people from other parts of the world come into our spaces with an open heart. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it was amazing because you can relate like cross-cultural, like the food, it's like, it's so flavorful, like you were saying, with the conversation, you can actually feel, smell, taste it almost as she
Yes.
describes it. And I have Iranian friends and I've been to rose ceremonies and it's so amazing, and I think Iranians are the best people. I've had, really, really nice friends, very loving. So it all comes through her book. So it was amazing to experience that.
Thank you for sharing that. Marjan and John, I see you're not muted. Did you want to share something?
Yes, I'm part of, I don't know if you guys can hear me, part of Farhang. Thank you both. I think the reason this book touched us so much is because the soul is still there. That's why we have the Farhang Foundation. My kids were both born here, but if you ask them where they're from, they say, I'm Iranian. So the soul goes deep, whether with all the complications that we've gone through, it's been hard to be an Iranian, I think, all the way through. from the Arab invasion, Turkish invasion, American invasion, on and on and on. But I think the dualism comes from survival. We were taught from beginning to survive as portraying ourselves as something else, but keeping our own inside.
Yes.
I thought that was interesting how it came through.
That is so beautiful. And when we were talking about the character of Ellie's mother, I was thinking a lot about survival as well, and how some of that harshness comes out of a need to survive, no matter what that means. I know myself as someone who left Iran when I was 2. I've been amazed by the survival of our community, and also I dreamed of spaces like this where we talk openly about our art, our feelings, our culture. And so, yes, Farhang is so essential. And
it is in our soul. I mean, I think we have changed because of circumstances, but down deep inside, we're still Persians.
Yes, yes, we are.
So that's pretty neat. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I see a hand from Rumi. That's our son. That's my son's name.
Oh, very cool. I'm Rumi. Nice to see everyone.
Oh, you're Rumi.
Yeah.
Hi.
My dad, Majid, and he would like to say something. You can speak, Dad.
Durud, Abdi John. And I want to express my feelings. I've read the book and was deeply touched with the story. I can relate to some of it and beyond. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering how much of this book can impact our movement and the transition in Iran, especially the movement Zan Zindagi Azadi, and how much by translating this book in Farsi can motivate the young generation. And this is, to me, it's a great thing to do, and it would be very crucial at this time. So I don't know, my question is clear?
Yeah.
Or...
No, the question is clear. I wish I could answer the question. I do believe with all my heart that art and storytelling opens people's minds and will have an impact that we can't predict, because as it opens people's hearts and minds, movements change, lives are changed. Whether that can change what happens in Iran, that's the eternal question I think everyone in our community has been asking for many, many years. Okay, I see 2 hands. Patty Ojun, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just kind of wanted to address Rumit's question. I mean, I think the people in Iran, from what I can tell and what we saw with the protests and, with the Green Movement before, I mean, they are motivated. They do have, the passion, the drive, the guts, to do all this. I think the good thing about books like this, is that it really brings like the American and international community, hopefully, to become, aware of the struggles of the Iranian community and, what they're trying to do. Because I just think we need more and more awareness from outside people and outside cultures about sort of what's going on. To hopefully maybe someday for there to be a change. Because I think, especially after with the Women Life Freedom, I think that's the longest time we saw people in Iran really, try to make a change. And obviously some changes were made. But I think the beautiful thing about this book is, it got picked as like the Goodreads historical fiction, one of the awards, and it was on Book of the Month. And so hopefully, it reaches this broad non-Iranian community, with some of whom I see on screen, I'm guessing, are not Iranian. And I think that's where it can be really, really powerful. So.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. There are so many hands. I think Neda Jun, you were the first one I saw.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank the Farhang Foundation. to put these wonderful programs together, the books, the movies, I don't know, about cooking and everything else. You guys are doing an extraordinary job to bring the Iranians together and also promoting the Iranian culture to the outside world. And that is wonderful. Secondly, I heard about this book from a non-Persian friend of mine, an American, that was telling me this is one of the best books to read and to listen to. So it was nice to hear it from somebody outside the Iranian community, that they are so into this and they're promoting it and they are learning about Iranian culture. And I think we need more of these kind of books. And so much has been going on in Iran, and Iranian have gone through so much that more and more stories like this should be written. And I encourage all the wonderful writers, Iranian writers, to do this. And thank you once again.
Thank you. I think that's so beautiful. Farhang, everyone at Farhang, we appreciate you. And everyone who feels the same way, make a point of supporting Iranian authors, filmmakers, musicians when you see them. Let's move on to Marjan.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to also thank Farhang Foundation for these beautiful events. I attended also the previous one, and I think they're really, really good. And you, Abdi, I think the way you discuss the books with the authors, it brings up so much more to the concept. So I really thank the questions you make. Something that I wanted to touch upon, because I lived in Iran around the same, I was the same age, younger than them, but I was in high school when the revolution happened. And now I see that also in response to the question that was asked about the movement, I see that young people in Iran have a kind of misleading view of how Iran looked like before the revolution. They think everything was perfect, the world was like the global ball, and they wish they could go back. And I'm really happy and thank Marjan for the portrayal of the real life in Iran. She was really honest in comparison that it was not as some young people may think. Some things were better, but not everything was perfect. So I think the way that it could affect the movement now is that give a better, a more realistic view to people, to young people, about how the world looked like back then, and if they really want to go back. I mean, so I think that was a beautiful portrayal of the life of Iranians before and after.
I couldn't agree more, and thank you for sharing that as someone who lived it. And that's also why books like these are so important, I think, because within the pages of a novel, there's an opportunity for the kind of nuance that you don't often get in a conversation that's purely political. So, storytelling has an ability to dig in beyond the black and white to all those gray areas.
Exactly.
Okay, Frida.
Hello.
Hello.
This is my first time joining the book club. I think it's fantastic. Thank you so much for organizing. And if you could definitely send out more information about all your programs, that would be amazing. I have to say, one of my favorite part of the book that made me very emotional was when they were marching in the street, how the men came and protected them. We have this portrayal of the Persian men that are very oppressing, against women, and how they are there. They don't want the woman to be free. And it wasn't like that then, and it's not like that now. That yes, there are definitely men that are like that, but even now, there are so many young men that are there protecting women's rights. And I think that was important to show in the book, and I appreciated that. I do book clubs with my friends that we have multicultural, and we actually read a lot of books from different cultures, China, India, Iran. And if any of you guys ever do book clubs yourself, one of the things that I always integrate is the foods that are in the book I cook. And so that's one of the things I love to do, that, you know, with this book, I had majority of the dishes that she talked about at our book club. So, you know, as we read, you know, we read it and we're discussing it, we're enjoying the food that she discussed. So I don't know if anybody else does that, but I encourage you to do that. It's
So
amazing.
we used to do a version of that in a book club. I didn't cook because I'm not a very good cook, but whatever book we read, we would always meet at a location that felt appropriate. So a restaurant from the culture we were reading about, or a spot that was mentioned if we were reading something local, and it made it so fun and resonant. I love that.
It did. And I have to say, so many of my non-Iranian friends, after they read this book, was so emotional about the book.
Well,
And another thing we discussed on this particular book club was I had invited some of my Iranian friends, and I had them tell us the story of their journey of living in Iran, because every one of us left at different time, at different age, and how it impacted us as a person and how it impacted our family. My husband is American, my kids are half Persian, and I wish I could take him back and see it,
yeah. Thank you. Thank you. While you're talking about the non-Iranian friends, I'm going to call on Anna next. And Anna, you wrote a comment about how you grew up in Chile and lived through the Pinochet dictatorship. And I don't know if that's what you want to talk about, but I always find it so fascinating when people who are not from Iran make really interesting correlations between other histories and ours. So I open the floor to you to whatever you want to share.
Thank you. It's the first time I'm joining you too, and I have read just a couple of authors, but the first one I read was reading Lolita in Tehran, which was amazing, and then this one. And thank you to the husband, Kamran, for staying, because that way you can tell her how poised she was when she was answering. Oh my gosh. I would want to talk to her as a friend every other day. She's amazing. And I'm sorry, I have 5-year-olds here. But I wanted to let you all know that other communities are reading these, and I enjoyed it very much. I saw several similarities with what I went through in Chile. And it's true that right now I have lived the same amount of years in Chile than in here. So I have to decide when people ask me, where are you from? What am I going to say from now on? Because before it was, yeah, I grew up in Chile. But the way she expressed and the amount of the way that she expressed the reality, she didn't embellish it. She was very respectful to all the different points and aspects of what was going on and still goes on. I think that more than anything is what will help people to read it and understand a little more, open up their minds and hearts to hopefully make the changes necessary without losing what the culture is, because we don't do that either, you know?
Absolutely. No, of course. Thank you for sharing. And now you've brought me back to middle school when I lived in suburban America. My only friend was from Chile. And, you know, I don't think we realized it when we were 12 years old, but I'm sure that the similar histories of our countries and our families leaving
Yeah.
is what bonded us. So thank you. And this is, when we share our truths, we get closer to each other. Let's go Paige and then Sheila.
Yes, I just want to say thank you so much for having this book club. It's my first time attending one of these. I'm not Iranian, but reading this book has just been so fulfilling on a very deep level. It's allowed me to understand Iranian culture better. I've been learning Farsi too, so reading the book and listening to the audiobook with the Farsi, I'm like, oh, I understand that. And it was just so powerful to see how language is such a big connector to culture and to people, and even to those in a culture who might not speak the language. Like, that does not mean that there's any less belonging because of that too. And I just want to say this book really helped me understand better, how to be a good friend, how to love more. And it's just been so beautiful, and I just am so grateful to share this space with you. And yeah, thank you so much.
It's really
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, Sheila June.
Sorry, I'm already very emotional. I don't know if you could tell I was crying when other people were sharing. My name's Sheila Mann. I'm half Persian. I grew up in Irvine and I work in Hollywood. So I used to be with Universal Pictures. I would say they were telling an Iranian story because there's so little of it in the entertainment industry for Middle Eastern people that are in front of the camera or behind the camera. And especially when someone was describing like Middle East men in my life. So I used to work for DreamWorks TV Development, which is the team that decides what gets turned into a TV show. And I'm always advocating for anyone from the Middle Eastern cultures. My little son right here. There's a lot of work to be done. So please, if anyone on this call is interested in writing or telling these stories, like please tell our stories. We need more of it. So I just want to say thank you so much.
No, thank you for saying that. And I think you may know that I also work in film and TV, both as a writer and a producer. And it is a very, very difficult industry for people from our part of the world. Almost every time I've written a script about Iranians, because I always get asked why I don't make Iranian films, those scripts don't get made, but they are used as samples to get me work writing about non-Iranians. It's a very, very hard industry for us to get a foothold.
I'm so sorry, my internet was bad.
Oh, no worries. I mean, I got the gist of what you're saying, and I think most people did too. But I do want to reiterate to everyone, this is just why we need to build community around our storytelling. We have to be the first people to show passion for our stories and hope that others catch up, like all the non-Iranians here. Okay, let's see. I don't see another hand. I did see one from Anusha earlier, but Anusha seems to be gone if you're there.
She had to leave. Yes, she's not here anymore.
Leave. Okay.
Well,
did anyone else want to share or?
Well, it's been fascinating talk. If anybody else has anything to say, please come forward. Otherwise, we can wrap.
Anna, did you want to say one other thing?
Real quick. So I have been a part of a book club for about 15 years now. And next Tuesday, we're actually choosing the books for next year. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I'm definitely going to propose this one. And I'm going to follow the idea of Frida. So I'm going to propose it. And when they come, I'm going to have some cooking from the book too. I thought that was genius. That was really cool. I like that idea. But that will, if we all give it if we belong to another book club, or then those little pockets keep on growing. And so, yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you all. Before I hand it off to Abdi Nazemian, I'd just like to say this is the second book club we've done, and they've both been so intellectually stimulating, but more importantly, emotional. It's such a safe space, and I thank Farhang for creating it and for allowing me to moderate. And with that, Abdi Nazemian, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What an incredible conversation. This has been, we are deeply grateful to Marjan Jan and Abdi Jan for today's truly captivating discussion about this unforgettable and profoundly impactful book. And thank you to all of you who joined us from across the globe to be here live in this second episode of Farhang Literature, and a special thanks to all who participated in today's live discussion. We are delighted to welcome you to Farhang Literature, and we look forward to announcing our next book very soon. As always, we welcome you to visit farhang.org for all the latest programs, events, and performances. Until then, we bid you farewell. Be umid didar. Thank you again. Thank you, Abdi Jan. It's always a pleasure to work with you. And thank you all who joined us, and have a great rest of your Saturday.